So, hello and welcome back to the channel. We'll be doing a Dr. Mike video. I love his channel.
There have been 40...
And let's just talk about how every president has died. So yeah, it's very interesting in my opinion. So yeah, let's get on with the video.
5 presidents in the history of the United States. And as of uploading this video, 39 of them have died. Today I'm talking about what killed every president and the bizarre circumstances that surrounded many of their deaths. 4 assassinations, a top secret surgery aboard a fishing boat. God bless America.
Well, I didn't kill him.
George Washington was killed by his doctors. That's what I think anyway. In 1799, then retired President
Yeah, I completely agree with that. He was probably just killed by his doctors.
Washington developed a sore throat. His condition worsened over the next few days, despite the efforts of several physicians. Of course, in 1799, medical treatment was very poor, as doctors often believed the best way to treat ailments was by balancing the humors, meaning they would balance the amount of blood.
Yeah, it was probably not a very good system, and if they just thought about it, then they would have thought that it wouldn't have been.
Phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile within the body.
That makes no sense!
Over the course of several days, doctors drained Washington of 32 ounces of his blood, gave him
That's a lot of blood.
blisters in his throat, forced him to vomit, and filled him with enemas. No surprise,
It was standard practice, and it's just one thing which killed a lot of people.
Washington passed after several days of this medieval torture. I do wonder if Washington would have lived longer had he just hydrated well and maybe got a Z.
Probably.
John Adams lived until 90 years old, the longest living president until Ronald Reagan, when he died of heart failure likely related to arterial sclerosis, a blockage of your arteries due to plaque buildup, usually occurring with old age or poor lifestyle habits. Strangely enough, Adams died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years to the...
And it was just a monumentous moment, and I think 2 or 3 presidents have died on the 4th of July.
day he signed the Declaration of Independence, and just 5 hours after Thomas Jefferson, who died the same exact day.
Boosh! Sifit.com quickly turns
And
books
their
into
last
money.
words
All
were
free apps,
very,
barcodes,
like,
and instantly
saying that
offers
they
great
both died on the
prices.
same day.
The cause of his death is not conclusive, but it was likely due to a variety of ailments such as diarrhea, kidney damage, and an enlarged, possibly cancerous
Well, prostate cancer doesn't kill you, you just die with it.
prostate. America's shortest president at just 5'4", James Madison lived until the age of 85 when he died of congestive heart failure, where the heart's ability to pump blood deteriorates, causing fluid buildup throughout the body. While specific details are not well recorded,
Yeah,
James
no one really, like, congestive heart failure is just something that happens with old age, so...
Monroe died in 1831 after a battle with tuberculosis, a bacterial
Yeah, he was bedridden for most of his presidency because of it.
infection that usually attacks the lungs. And while he may have been only America's 5th president, at the time of his death, he joined Adams and Jefferson to become the 3rd president to die on July 4th. The fact of former presidents dying on July 4th was not lost on the American people, with the trend becoming a bit of a mid-1800s meme. John Quincy Adams served 1 term as president and then became the first to die in office, though not in
He wasn't president, but he was on the floor of Congress. Well, he wasn't technically on the floor, he wasn't speaking, but he was in the chair in the audience, waiting for his turn to be called up, and then just keeled over and died while sitting down.
though not in office as president. You see, after losing the election of 1829, John Quincy Adams continued his public service by holding Congress for 9 terms. At the age of 78, during a contentious debate over the Mexican-American War on the floor of the House of Representatives, Adams collapsed, suffering a significant stroke, where there's decreased circulation to the brain leading to neurological damage. He died at his home 2 days later, but not before what must have been a spectacular emergency on Capitol Hill.
it
Andrew
really
Jackson suffered a long and slow decline in health before dying at the age of 78. The cause of his death, though, has been widely disputed.
knows.
Some attributing it to the use of the medication calomel, leading to heavy metal poisoning. But JAMA states he probably died of kidney failure with full body swelling, known at the time as dropsy.
Well, yeah, but that can come from heavy metal poisonings.
While it's not entirely certain what killed Martin Van Buren, many sources, including his obituary in the New York Times, cite issues originating within his chest. It's likely his decline
He was a smoker. Because he was a smoker, he probably had some sort of lung infection.
Began with a lung infection, leading to cardiopulmonary failure. Now, things get interesting. William Henry Harrison delivered a 2-hour inaugural address in freezing drizzle without a coat or gloves, which many people believe to be the cause of pneumonia, an infection of the lungs.
Which is possible, something getting in there. And he had one of the shortest presidencies. One of, I don't know if it was actually the shortest.
Which killed him only 1 month into sight issues originating within his chest. It's likely he's breathed the president and everywhere! Rather, doctors believe the most effective medical treatments were to, just like with Washington, balance the humors.
Yep.
Doctors blistered the president and made him drink substances that forced him to vomit and have diarrhea. Of course, none of those methods actually worked. Goop. And so, William Henry Harrison remains our president with the shortest stint in office. John Tyler took over for William Henry Harrison and served the remainder of that term as president. Historians claim he was never very healthy to begin with and died in 1862 of a stroke. He remains the only president in U.S. history not to be buried with the Stars and Stripes, as he was the darling of the Confederacy and was buried with their flag instead. James K. Polk had grand visions of his life after the presidency, leaving Washington on a southern tour of the U.S., eventually hoping to end in Nashville, where he had purchased a large home.
And yeah, it was really true, and it's really interesting, the house.
Unfortunately, Polk died 3 months after leaving office. The shortest post-presidency stint in American history from cholera, a diarrheal disease caused by drinking contaminated water.
Ew.
Yeah.
Zachary Taylor served a year in office before
DC didn't have the best plumbing systems.
dying under what many would say are suspicious circumstances. To this day, many claim he was poisoned by pro-slavery Southerners.
I think he was.
The cause of his death was so controversial that in 1991, his descendants actually agreed to have his remains exhumed for testing, which did not find a high enough volume of arsenic inside his remains to suggest a definitive poisoning. A more common theory,
But it could have been a poison that degraded over time.
he contracted cholera or dysentery after celebrating the 4th of July.
And again, with the DC plumbing issues, that didn't really get sorted until like 100 years later.
Washington, D.C., which at the time had primitive sewers, often resulting in food and water contamination. Millard Fillmore is rumored to have been the White House's first health-conscious president, avoiding alcohol and tobacco. He did die from a stroke at the age of 74. Franklin Pierce died at the age of 69 from cirrhosis of the liver, likely due to a lifetime
Anyway, sorry about that.
of heavy drinking. Alcohol abuse damages the
Yeah, he was a large drinker, and because he was a large drinker, they caused that. And he was actually famous for how much he drank, and if he was president when Prohibition wanted to come around, it would not have.
liver directly, as ethanol is a toxin, which leads to inflammation and massive swelling within the gut. James Buchanan is considered by many to be the worst president in the history of the United States, as he did
Second worst, in my opinion.
nothing to preserve the Union before handing a country divided by slavery to Abraham Lincoln.
You are useless.
Information on his death is far and
He was useless, but he wasn't as bad as Woodrow Wilson.
few between, with most reports claiming he died at the age of 77 from pneumonia. Abraham Lincoln, gun. Next. Just kidding. Though the death of Abraham Lincoln is probably the most
Probably due to his doctors, in my opinion. His head doctor shoved his finger into his brain.
well known on this list, it's not without its intrigue. Just 5 days after the Union victory of the Civil War, famous actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes
It was very interesting how John was moved out. He was tracked down to a farm in the middle of nowhere, and then the barn was on fire, and there was almost like a shootout that went. He was shot in the back of the head himself.
Booth snuck into Lincoln's box at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., and fired a .44 caliber single-shot Derringer pistol directly into the back of Lincoln's head,
And then jumped off straight into the audience down
from
below.
just inches away. Lincoln immediately fell into a coma
And he died 7 hours later.
and died across the street 7 hours later. This We know, but here are the juicy details that are often looked over. Heavily detailed notes on Lincoln's final hours and his following autopsy were taken by the president's personal physician, Dr. Robert Stone, which is how we know that Dr. Stone did nothing to help the situation by using his finger to probe the wound and search for the bullet, putting unnecessary pressure inside the president's brain at his most vulnerable time. Look, he was gonna die no matter what they did, but a dirty, gloveless finger inside the brain probably didn't help. Andrew Johnson became the first president to go on and serve in the Senate after his presidency and died of a stroke at the age of 66. Ulysses S. Grant was an avid cigar smoker, which was a likely cause of his throat.
And yeah, he had throat cancer, but as well he also had scarring in his lungs and a lung infection and a possibly cancerous tumour.
Cancer that killed him at the age of 63. It was this death that largely sparked Americans' fear of the disease, which we still see today. Rutherford B. Hayes died at the age of 70 of complications after a heart attack. Assassination number 2. Only 18 months into his presidency, James A. Garfield was shot on a train platform in Baltimore, Maryland by Charles Julius Guiteau, a lawyer and author.
A lot of the people who are assassinating presidents tend to be from high up places who think that they know best. And I think this one was because he was the sole reason.
Was deeply disillusioned, believing he was instrumental
to the reason that he was actually became president, and that is why, and he thought that he should get some of the cut as being from Garfield being president, but no, so shot him.
Garfield's election, and therefore furious when he was not rewarded with his own political appointment. Guiteau was executed after being found guilty of murdering Garfield, but not before he argued that he didn't kill Garfield. Rather, Garfield's doctors were to blame. While Guiteau was no doubt responsible for pulling the trigger, firing a bullet into Garfield's back, the thing is,
his doctors did nothing. It was only in his back, and it would have done much, and therefore his doctors could have done something.
Might be right.
What?
Reports indicate that the bullet created a 3.5-inch wound in Garfield's abdomen, with the bullet finally resting in a benign location between his groin and navel. It took 3 months for the infection to kill Garfield, but not before countless doctors used their fingers and tools to open the wound to 20 inches in width in an endless search for this bullet.
I saw my brother playing Junkyard Keeper, but I noticed he was overloading the big magnet with way too much garbage. I honestly don't even think he knows how bad he was doing.
It wasn't just the doctors either. As famed
and everyone was poking and prodding at it to try and find the bullet.
Telephone inventor Alexander Graham Bell used the world's first metal detector to provide a general location of this bullet. Countless physicians have debated the exact cause of Garfield's death and will never be able to say for sure.
An infection from it.
But had doctors simply sewed Garfield up and allowed him to rest, he may not have died from this gunshot wound after all. Chester A. Arthur died 2 years after leaving office from a significant cerebral hemorrhage. Thought to have been caused by his hypertension or high blood pressure. Grover
and that happened from his bad lifestyle.
Cleveland died of a heart attack at the age of 71, but that's far from the most interesting event in his medical history. In the summer of 1893, at the beginning of his second term in office, he felt a lump in the roof of his mouth. His doctor diagnosed...
Yeah, and then it was I think it was a cancer. And he had the top of his mouth, almost the top of his jaw taken out, part of it, on a fishing boat in the middle of the sea, so that no one would know that his health was suffering. And that mustache was so that he could hide it.
His cancer and recommended having it removed immediately. Cleveland feared news of him having cancer would shake the stock market and disrupt the nation, so he opted for a secret surgery aboard a yacht during a 4-day fishing trip.
Yep,
this
that's
is
what I
a
said.
secret.
6 surgeons numbed the president up with ether, successfully removed the tumor, 5 teeth, and a large part of his upper left jawbone in just 90 minutes, swaying back and forth in the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Because the surgery was inside the president's mouth and his signature mustache remained intact, Cleveland hid the surgery from the public. Despite whirling rumors, smear campaigns, and discrediting journalists, the operation remained unconfirmed for 24 years before one of the doctors broke their silence and finally told the truth. Benjamin Harrison was the grandson of President William Henry Harrison, and just like Grandpa, he died of pneumonia at the age of 68. Assassination number 3. 6 months into his second term in 1901, William McKinley was shot twice in the abdomen by Leon Frank.
I think I know who he's talking about, and yeah, he was shot in the abdomen. I think it hit his stomach, actually, which kind of caused him to die, partly, but I think it was also a doctor's issue, kind of, as well.
Yeah, that's the hardest one.
It's Czolgosc.
Holy Sholgosh.
By
Yep.
Leon Frank Czolgosz, making him the third U.S. president to be assassinated in 36 years. Czolgosz lost his job during the economic panic of 1893 and became a believer in anarchism, or a terrorist movement sweeping across Europe that
It was sweeping across the entire world.
seek to assassinate world leaders. Czolgosz approached McKinley in a crowded building at a festival in Buffalo, shook his hand, and fired 2 shots from a .32 revolver. One bullet bounced off a button and didn't
Yep.
harm McKinley, but the other penetrated his abdomen. McKinley was rushed to a nearby hospital where a surgeon sewed up the entry and exit wounds from the bullet in the president's stomach, though the bullet was never found. Doctors were optimistic for a healthy recovery in the
Also, kind of a bit of lead poisoning.
following days. But a week or so later, they discovered his wounds had become gangrenous, where parts of the body begin to die and cause deeper infection.
Partly from the, lead poisoning can also cause that.
It was the death of William McKinley that ignited a national discussion about protecting the president, with Congress ultimately charging the Secret Service with that exact duty in 1906. Theodore Roosevelt died in his sleep in 1919.
Theodore Roosevelt had so many pets. He had a hyena, a bear, several dogs, and he kind of started with a teddy bear because he didn't shoot a bear.
When a blood clot entered his lung. Future Vice President Thomas R. Marshall famously said, "Death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight."
Yep.
William Howard Taft was our nation's heaviest president, at one point reaching 340 pounds, and died
Which probably caused part of his problems later on.
at the age of 72 after lingering in a coma caused by complications with high blood pressure, heart disease, and inflammation of the bladder. Time for my favorite one. While in office, Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke in 1990.
Hate him.
That paralyzed his left side and nearly blinded him. Out of fear that the news would shake the country, Wilson and his inner circle kept the president's health a complete secret,
Yep.
hiding him away where he could only be seen by his personal physician and his wife, Edith Wilson, the star of this story. While it's never been conclusively proven, it is believed that instead of serving as the intermediary between her husband, the president, and the cabinet actually running the country, Edith took it upon herself to make countless executive
And she basically became like the first female president.
decisions, effectively serving as America's first female president. Where's that movie? Woodrow Wilson survived the remainder of his term and died 3 years later of further complications from his stroke. Warren G. Harding died in office at the age of 57 from what is believed to have been a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. His cause of death is not entirely
Prohibition president.
conclusive because his wife refused an autopsy. Calvin Coolidge died alone in his bedroom from coronary thrombosis, or a clot in the coronary artery blocking blood flow to the heart. Herbert Hoover lived 31 years after leaving the White House amidst the Great Depression. In 1962, Hoover was diagnosed with colon cancer and had a tumor
Was it Hoover? I think it was Hoover, actually. I
removed from his
forget.
large intestine.
One
2 years
mistake.
later, his intestines ruptured, causing massive bleeding, leading to a coma and his eventual
I'm not very good at American history.
death in 1964. Franklin Delano Roosevelt holds the record for most presidential terms, having
Yeah.
won 4 elections in a row from 1932 until his death in office. In 1944, a team of physicians performed a full assessment of FDR and found he was suffering from numerous heart issues, high blood pressure, and bronchitis, likely all of these caused by a lifetime
Of smoking, he just loved to smoke, and therefore he just died from it.
of smoking and heavy amounts of tobacco. Despite his declining health, he ran for a 4th presidential term, privately saying he would resign once World War II was over. The stress eventually overwhelmed Roosevelt in April of 1945, resulting in a brain bleed while posing for a portrait. He collapsed and died shortly thereafter. Harry Truman was hospitalized for 22 days at the age of 88 because of heart failure, heart arrhythmia, and kidney failure. He
Wasn't
became
that long
comatose
ago, his death, really? Let's be honest.
due to sepsis, the body's life-threatening response to an infection, and died the night after Christmas in 1972. At one point, Dwight D Eisenhower smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, which
Yeah, so smoking was a very popular thing in the 40s, 50s, and therefore and even doctors were promoting it, and therefore it just kind of killed a lot of the presidents.
contributed to years of heart issues. He suffered several heart attacks and even survived numerous cardiac arrests. No surprise he died of heart failure in 1969. He did beat Hitler, though. John F. Kennedy may have had the most complex medical history out of any U.S. president.
He did.
He is known to have had, or was speculated to have, the following conditions and diseases: scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, chickenpox, severe spastic colitis or IBS, Cushing's syndrome, urinary tract infections, prostatitis, Addison's disease, malaria, adrenal insufficiency, and chronic back pain, amongst others. Despite his countless health problems, his back issues were the one that played a role in his infamous assassination in Dallas in 1968. Specifically, the back brace that he wore because of failed back surgeries hidden underneath his suit, it actually prevented Kennedy from ducking after being hit with the first bullet. Who fired the bullet? Well, that's a video for a different channel.
So what happened was the assassin fired a bullet, it hit a tree, ricocheted off and hit a pedestrian before hitting the bridge. And then the second one hit his back, I think, and then the third one hit his head.
Lyndon B. Johnson was a hero of the Democratic Party for passing groundbreaking civil rights legislation in the 1960s. And he was also the hero of the Party for going hard with food, alcohol, and cigarettes. In a famous interview with Walter Cronkite, LBJ said smoking calmed him down, and it was better for his heart to smoke and be relaxed than not smoke and be nervous. An interesting hypothesis that probably contributed
to him dying much later
to the
on.
heart attack that killed him in his Texas ranch in 1973. Richard Nixon was 81 years old when a blood clot in his left atrium became dislodged and traveled to his brain, causing a stroke. He quickly fell into a coma and died 4 days later. Gerald Ford died in 2006 with a death certificate that cites arteriosclerotic cerebral vascular disease and diffuse arterial sclerosis, or a thickening of arterial walls causing poor circulation, leading to organ damage. Ronald Reagan spent the final 10 or so years of his life in a losing battle with Alzheimer's disease, where brain cells and connections die
Well, he kind of had Alzheimer's during his presidency as well.
slowly, causing loss of memory and other issues. He eventually died in 2004 from pneumonia. And finally, our most recent, George H.W.
2013, I think.
Bush, who in 2012 was diagnosed with vascular Parkinsonism, or a type of deterioration of brain tissue from blocked small blood vessels affecting motor function, necessitating the use of a mobility scooter and limiting his speech. The condition slowly worsened into his 90s, and he died on November 30th, 2018.
Oh,
I actually immigrated to the US at the age of 6.
Anyway, that's the end of that video. So remember to like and subscribe to Dr. Mike and myself. Love his videos, and yeah. I'll see you in the next video, and bye.